Tonight, I'll be talking about some of the cacti and many of the succulents native to New Mexico. And there are just too many plants to make it into one program. And I did cut out quite a few of the prickly pears, which many people will cheer about, but that's the way it goes. So here we go. I prepared this talk, and I've given the talk several times to European audiences, so I briefed them on just where New Mexico is. And for the benefit of the future YouTube audiences, New Mexico is here in the southwestern part of the US, and we're right at the southern end of the Rocky Mountain chain. And here it shows clearly where New Mexico is inside the United States. We have a border with Mexico, the state of Chihuahua. Now the Europeans are amazed by this, and I will tell you just from the perspective of the Europeans, where so many thousands of people grow cacti, New Mexico is really far south relative to Europe. The northern border of New Mexico is at the same latitude as the south coast of Sicily. And the southern border of New Mexico is the same latitude as northern Egypt. So virtually all Europeans are much further north than we are, even if you live in northern New Mexico. The other thing I like to emphasize with the audiences that are not from New Mexico is that, yes, we do have a winter. Many of you have had the chance to pick up a cactus book that's been written by a European, and they often say that cacti native to the American Southwest need to be kept above 50 degrees at all times. And I'm trying to drive home the point that that's just pure hogwash, because all of New Mexico gets very cold, and it doesn't happen every year that all of the state can go down to 0 or go below 0 Fahrenheit. And here's the Sandia Mountains near Albuquerque, and there are cacti all the way up on top. There's Pedicactus simpsoni variety minor up on top, and Echinocerius viridiflorus is scattered around almost all the way up on top. And then on the sides on the way up, there's all sorts of prickly pears, and there's sedums and yuccas, and there's many plants that grow at places where it's really brutally cold. Here's a close-up of one of the peaks on South Peak that I took standing in my front yard one winter morning. And it's beautiful to see the trees all frosted. A couple of winters ago, I went out after a snowfall, and I wanted to get pictures of quite a few cacti and other local succulents and xeric plants in the snow, to show people around the world that, yes, there are plenty of cacti that are adapted to being cold, and they do just fine in the snow. Here's Yucca glauca, which is very abundant all around central and northern New Mexico, and the common cholla and the common creeping prickly pear, Pontia Polyacantha, makes these chains that creep along the ground, and Cylindro Pontia imbricata is the very common local cholla. The large prickly pear that lives in the Sandia foothills is Pontia wooteni, and they can make pretty big clusters. They can get 6-8 feet across, and in the summer when they're pumped up, they're 2 to 3 feet tall. In the wintertime, they dehydrate quite a bit, so they flop over in the wintertime. And here locally, there's a lot of Echinocerius fendleri in the foothills of the Sandias. They're not at all hard to see. And Escobaria vivipara variety Neo-Mexicana, peeking out from the snow after being buried for a week or so. And one of the really nice xeric plants that grows in over much of New Mexico is Nolina Grenian. They're quite common in the foothills of the mountains. And you may know it by the common name of bear grass. It's in the agave family. And here's a seedling of Nolina Grenian growing out from a rock crack. So it started out life in just a tiny little spot, and time will tell if it will be able to mature. This is one of my favorite pictures of cacti of all time. It's a plant that's native to the boot heel area and over into Arizona. I'm cheating here a little bit because Coryphantha robustispina just starts a little bit west of the New Mexico-Arizona state line, west of Lordsburg, but Coryphantha robustispina variety Shearii grows widespread over southern New Mexico, but it's such a beautiful picture to see this plant with the spines just peeking out from the snow. On this occasion, we had 8 inches of snow, and it didn't get above freezing for 2 weeks. And so the plant was below freezing all this time. And yes, they are tough. And finally, the sun came out and the spines just started to peek out. It's Echinocerius rigidissimus that's native to the boot heel south of Lordsburg. Again, peeking out from the snow. This is the famous white sands form of Echinocerius Triglochiliadis. They were buried under the snow, and the snow is melting, and this species is extremely tough. I think they could handle at least down to around 25 below zero. And another local New Mexico endemic is Echinocerius fendleri variety Kunstleri. It's quite a rare plant. It's only known from the lower eastern slopes of the Sacramento Mountains. And another plant from south central and southwestern New Mexico, Sclerocactus Radii. It has proven to be quite adaptable in my yard, and it has taken the snow and the cold and the wet, and it hasn't been bothered at all. I have this image in. This is what you see when you're up in the Four Corners area. This is up north of Navajo Lake. So I'm standing in New Mexico, and it's the San Juan Mountains of southern Colorado. They come right down to the New Mexico border, and this picture was taken in mid-May. So these higher mountains in the northern part of the state, they stay snow-covered for a long time. And I zoomed out and used the telephoto to show just how extensive and how deep the snow is in the borderlands of New Mexico and Colorado. Then this is the area around Navajo Lake up by Farmington. And there's a lot of cacti that live in this region. And one of them is Echinocerius Triglochiliadis variety Mohavensis. And there's two varieties of trigs in New Mexico. With variety mojavensis, when you feel the spines, they're round like a sewing needle. And I'll show you an example of the other variety when we get to it in the pictures. But variety mojavensis is just in the northwestern corner of New Mexico. Another plant up here that's extremely restricted geographically. It's just known from one small hill, is Pedicactus knowltonii, and it's the smallest species of cactus native to New Mexico. The heads will start to flower when they're just a little over a half an inch across, and during the winter the heads can be below the soil level. They'll pull down underground for shelter, and in the springtime they'll elevate and flower and fruit. And if the summer is hot and dry, then they will pull down and retract underground again, just for shelter, to keep from dehydrating too much. And if there is enough rainfall, they will stay above ground during the summer. And here's a close-up of another Pedicactus knowltonii. I like to point out the rock behind it with all of the lichen on it. This looks like a moist area, but it really isn't. It's quite dry, and evaporation here is quite high, so there's a pretty severe water deficit. And also growing here, living locally, is Escobaria vivipara variety arizonica, which this is present for about the northern 2/3 of New Mexico. Also here, there are a lot of Sclerocactus Cloveride living in the region around Navajo Lake and other areas in the Farmington area. I had to take a drink. If you make it up to this part of the state in the middle part of May, you can see them in flower. And here's a close-up of another plant with a slightly different flower color, being lighter pink. And you can see these gravelly cobblestones in the background. They love to grow in this region on these low rolling hills with these gravel cobblestones that have been deposited by the water movement. And if you look closely, you'll see a whole bunch of plants here. There's one back here, and here's one in flower, and here's one in flower, and here's a large one in flower. Here's one in flower, and here's another one in flower. And there's probably a few that I'm not seeing right now. But anyway, when you have a good habitat, these plants can be quite abundant. And the populations fluctuate quite dramatically from year to year. In years when they get quite abundant, then insects can move in, and various beetles and moths lay their eggs inside the body of the cactus. And when the eggs hatch, the larvae eat out the core of the plant, so then most of the plants in an area will die. So then most of the insects die. So you have this cycle that goes on and on of the cycle of the insects and the plants. Then in really high elevation parts of central New Mexico up into northern north central and a little bit northwestern New Mexico, you can see Pedicactus simpsoni variety minor. And the southernmost location that's known for them is the very top of the Manzano Mountains, east of Berlin. It's a little over 10,000 feet. And they're also at about 10,000 feet elevation in the Sandias. And then from here, you go north and they're in the mountains around Taos, and further north and a little bit further west, and then up into Colorado and all the way up into Oregon and Washington. But this is a really true alpine type cactus. It really prefers to be cold. They dislike intensely hot nights, and Albuquerque is just on the edge of where you can grow this thing. I knew I had a friend in the Chicago area about 30 years ago that wanted to grow it, and they always died on him during the summer. And the only way he could keep them alive was every summer evening he would put it in the refrigerator, and then in the morning he would take it out. And they don't mind hot days, but it's the hot nights that they just die out and fade if they're subjected to hot nights. And also from near Socorro, north and west, you can see Sclerocactus parviflorus in New Mexico, and they can get quite big. Occasionally, rarely, you will see a plant that gets up to about 18 inches tall. They're usually in the order of 6 to 8 inches tall, and they're pretty chunky, and they have these long hook spines. It's quite an impressive plant to see. And another one of our famous plants in New Mexico, it's also native to Arizona and a tiny bit of far west Texas, and they've recently been found in the Juarez area in Chihuahua, but New Mexico is quite famous for Pontia Polyacantha. The common name is the paper spine cactus or the gramagrass cactus. They're typically about half the size of your little finger. And occasionally you will see a large plant that's about the size of your thumb. And they grow in really widespread colonies. They do grow over a lot of the state of New Mexico, but the colonies are widely scattered, and if you just set out trying to look for this plant, it would probably take you 10 years to find some, but they are around here and there. And here's a picture of a large plant that's slightly bigger than a man's thumb in flower. And sometimes you see them in the most unexpected places. This is out northwest of Socorro in a really desolate, hostile place. And we found quite an extensive colony of them. And there's a really large plant with 2 heads. The spines are very long and curly and twisted. Again, each head is roughly the size of a man's thumb. Another plant that's scattered over a wide region of New Mexico is Mammalia radii, and they are scattered around the Sandia foothills in Albuquerque, and there's quite a few plants scattered around in Santa Fe, in the town, primarily on the south side of town, but they're found in the Manzanos, and I've seen them in the Madrone Mountains, and they're out west of Socorro, all the way over to the Arizona border. So they're just widely scattered. they're quite small. They're very difficult to find. It really helps to go find them. They explode into growth and they flower just after the first rain comes, when the monsoon hits around the 1st of July. So really the prime time to go see them is about the first week of July. And if you're lucky, you will catch them in flower. They're typically about 1 to 2 inches in diameter. They're soft and flabby, and they have hooked spines. And here's a close-up of a plant. The plant here in this image is a little over 1 inch in diameter. And in addition to the open flower, you can see all the flower buds around it. So in following days, you'll have an extended flower show. I'm throwing in a lot of scenery too, just because New Mexico is a beautiful state, and when you travel around, you see all these beautiful places. Here's Angel Peak, that's up a little east of Bloomfield, and there's a wilderness area here, and it's a great place to go explore and hiking. And there's some nice cacti in this region. Here's Echinocerius coccineus. That coccineus loves to grow where there's plenty of rocks in the soil. New Mexico has 2 claret cups. They both have the common name of claret cup. And in general, coccineus is more out in full sun, and they like to grow to where the soil has lots of rocks in it. There's also Sclerocactus parviflorus here, and here's a small plant coming into flower. Now here, I was talking about the trigs. Here is Echinocerius Triglochiliadis, and what separates this from mojavensis? Look at the spines in detail. The spines are, they're not round like a sewing needle, but they're angled. They often have about 3 sides, but they definitely have flat sides on the spines, and they are twisted and curly because of this. So, and you find Triglochiliadis, it's over much of the state from Alamogordo north up to Santa Rosa and Las Vegas, and then west over to the Continental Divide is sort of a rough layout of where you can see it. Now, near Angel Peak, there's a small area called Cuts Canyon, another beautiful scenic place and a nice place to go hiking. And there's also interesting cacti here. And one of them is Sclerocactus Cloveride subspecies Brachii. It's a miniature form of cloveride that stays small in all aspects. Usually the plants stay less than 2 inches in diameter and less than about 1 inch tall. And here's the previous plant coming into flower in the spring. And bouncing around over toward Shiprock, the northwestern part of New Mexico has a lot of local endemics. And one of the most unique ones to go see up here is Sclerocactus Mesa. They grow in these low rolling hills. They're made out of Manco shale that's been eroded down, so it's kind of silty. It's it's almost bordering on mud, but it's mud with a lot of grit in it. And this is in the early spring, so you can see where the plant expanded the previous year, and during the winter it shrunk. And here's another case of the plant. The plant in the previous growing season expanded and pushed this gritty shale silt aside, and then after the winter it shrunk down, and it's hiding in a little pocket. And these hills of Manco shale up in the Shiprock area, they are really brutal looking. There's not a whole lot of stuff growing on them. This is the sort of habitat that they like, these low rolling hills of decomposed Manco shale. Here's an unusual specimen with hooked central spines. About 99% of them have a straight central spine, but every now and then you run across a plant that has hooked central spines. And here I am standing in an area with this Manco shale, and there were a lot of plants in this area. It was just amazing to see how well they were doing. There's a whole group of young plants. There's a whole swath of them across the top here. There's another plant down here just poking out of the mud. And in general, these plants are extremely difficult to grow in cultivation. Even if you grow them from seed, they're still extremely challenging. Sometimes Ralph can give a talk about how to grow these guys. Now for some of the prickly pears around. This is widespread over a huge part of New Mexico. It's Polyacantha variety Hystricina. They have these really long, round, needle-like spines. And they flower towards the end of May is when they come into flower. And here's one with pink flowers, and growing together side by side is another Hystricina with yellow flowers. And it's quite typical in these colonies of Hystricina to see mixed flower colors. That's normal, it's not the exception. Here's another Echinocerius Triglochiliadis. They make a beautiful flower show in May. It's usually about mid-May. If you're out hiking, you'll see them in flower. And here's a close-up of the flowers there. These make a fantastic garden plant. They're hard to beat. If you can make it to our spring sale, there's usually a lot of these available because lots of club members grow these from seed. And they're very adaptable. You can set them out. They flower well, and the hummingbirds just go crazy over the flowers. Now we're jumping to another part of the state. This is the border area between New Mexico and Texas. It's at the very north end of the Franklin Mountains and the foothills in this area that come down into New Mexico. And here there's many kinds of cacti. Here's Echinocerius fendleri variety rectus venus in flower. In the southeastern part of the state, there's Echinocactus texensis, which is the common name is horse crippler, because if a horse would step on the plant and the spines poke into the hoof, it can cause quite a serious injury. This plant is extremely tough. They can take all the abuses that New Mexico can dish out, all the heat, all the cold, all the heavy rain, all the snow, just you name it, and this thing can take it. The common cholla in the southwestern part of the state is Pontia spinosior. It's different from the cholla in the Albuquerque area in that the spine density is much greater. So when you look at the plant from about 20 feet away, you mostly see spines. All along the south central and then all across the southern part of the state, you see ocotillos or Fuquaria splendens. And they too make a very nice yard plant in Albuquerque. Ralph has some of the premier ocotillos in his yard. They must be 16 feet tall. They're just massive. And they really put on a flower show. Here is Pontia Engelmannii, and in the spring it's coming into growth. In the boot heel area, you can see Coryphantha robustispina variety valida. It lives from the boot heel all the way across over to the areas around Las Cruces. And they love these low rolling hills of softer soils that have lots of little rocks in them. Here's showing the plant in the spring coming into growth, beautiful new spines. And here's the plant in flower in the summertime. Here's Yucca Ilada, widespread across south central and southwestern New Mexico. If you go around the Deming and Silver City area, they make a forest of really large plants. They can get up to around 15 feet tall, and they are hardy in the Albuquerque area. They're completely able to live here. If you can grow some from seed and plant it out in your garden, they'll do very well here. And here's Agave Palmeri. This is found mainly in the southwestern part of the state, from around Deming, both to the west and to the south. And it's by far the largest agave native to New Mexico. A big plant can be about 6 feet high. And they really have a huge flower stalk when they come into flower. Here's Yucca Picada, which grows almost everywhere in the state. They put on a beautiful flower show in May. And one of the plants that's quite hard to find, they are scattered around. They live in the Rio Grande Valley from about TRC to the south. They're also in the Tularosa Basin around Alamogordo, and then they're around Deming to the west and to the south. But if you set out to look for one, I think you would walk for a long time before you would see one. But there's one coming into flower in May, and I'll show you the tuber here in a few pictures. But see the big flower buds appearing. Here's a close-up of the flower buds. The stems, they usually start out life under or inside of a bush. So the stems are supported by the bush, and they're often 2 to 3 feet tall. Sometimes they can be 6 feet tall, and sometimes they will outlive the bush. The bush will die, and then the plant is exposed and out in the open. And here's what the tuber looks like. The tubers are huge. The Tucson Cactus Club, they have a rescue program set up with the state of Arizona. And in Tucson, there's always building going on where there's construction sites, and the state notifies the Cactus Club when there's going to be total disturbance of an area, and the Cactus Club goes out, and they've dug up just hundreds of these. I guess if you want to acquire some of these, you can join the Tucson Cactus Club. They sell a lot of these every year at their plant sale. And they're all tagged, it's all legal because they're rescues. And then on warm summer nights, 2 or 3 times during the summer, you'll get these huge flower shows where they have the timing down. All the plants in an area, they tend to all flower on the same night. And then at first light in the morning, there's enough light to take a picture. Now, back still in the blue-tailed part of the state, south of Lordsburg, is Echinocerius rigidissimus. They're quite common on some of these low mountain slopes. They can get up to about 18 inches tall. This is a really big one. This one was close to 18 inches tall. And here's the flower. The flowers are just spectacular. They flower really late. It's one of the last Echinocerius to flower. It's well into the heat of summer when they produce their flowers. And this will show you why this plant is called the Echinocerius fendleri variety rectus venus, because the spines are long and they're straight and they're sticking right out perpendicular to the side of the plant body. Here's Mammalia hyderide variety Bullingtoniana. It's mostly in the south central and southwestern part of New Mexico, and they're quite shy. They're often hiding under a bush, or they're rarely out in the open, but they seek the shelter of something to protect them from the sun. And the other pancake mam that's spread over a large part of the state, this is more abundant on the eastern part of the state, and they make it all the way up into southeastern Colorado. So they're in Santa Fe around town, and then out toward Las Vegas and out toward Mora, and along the eastern edge of the Sangre de Cristos all the way up to the Colorado border. So they are very tough at resisting cold. There's a lot of snow in this area, and there is a fair amount of moisture. So I would suggest to grow it in the Albuquerque area. They would like to have a little bit of water during the spring and summer. Now, for some of the Escobarias, New Mexico is famous. We have a lot of local endemic type Escobarias where they live on mountain islands. Here's Escobaria Organensis. It's southwest of Lordsburg, right on the New Mexico-Arizona border, but they're nearly all in New Mexico, and they grow on limestone cracks. And here's a close-up of a plant coming into flower in the spring. And Mammalia wilcoxii. It's different from Radii in that it has a lot more spines per area. It's at least double the spines. Pontia chlorotica. It's a much more tall and upright plant than any other prickly pear native to the state. They're down around Silver City. Pontia Potzii is widespread over a huge part of the state, and they have a taproot that's shaped kind of like an ear of corn. It's a long cylindrical taproot, and when they flower, the flowers are real beautiful. They can flower all different colors in the same colony, but here's a flower of a Potzii. And when you're out hiking around the state, you'll run across some animals. Here's a hawk-nosed snake. They're quite common during the summer monsoon season. Their main food source are the toads that come out after the good summer rains. And you'll also see a lot of horned lizards. Here's the Texas horned lizard, and it's walking around on a real gravelly slope, and the mimicry is quite impressive. And you always see hawks when you're out walking around. Here's a Cooper's hawk, and if you're lucky, you'll see one swoop down and grab something like a small bird and grab it and take off. Back to the cacti, Echinocereus dasyacanthes. This lives from southeast New Mexico. It's always east of the Central Mountains, and it makes it up as far as a bit north of Santa Rosa. So it's a real widespread distribution. Here's a really large plant. It's an excellent garden plant for almost anywhere in New Mexico, very adaptable. The spine colors are quite variable. There's a dark grayish red one. Look at the soil growing in this gravel alluvium. But the flowers are just amazing. They could flower all sorts of different colors. This is just amazing. Two-tone kind of yellow and orange. And here's one with yellow and pink. And the last one, here's one that has a lot of white in it. A white dasyacanthes is extremely rare. And these are pure dasyacanthes. In this area, there are no coccineus around for it to hybridize with. It's just this particular colony, which is, it's north of Santa Rosa. The range of flower colors is just spectacular. And growing in the same area north of Santa Rosa is Pontia Polyacantha. It has the name because it has many spines. And this is pretty close to the toughest plant that lives in New Mexico. They can handle, without too much trouble, temps down to 40 below zero, because this thing ranges up into the prairie provinces of Canada. Now, jumping into some of the foothills in south central New Mexico, I like this picture because we went hiking here in November, and it was interesting to see there are fall foliage colors on the ocotillos. And I found that quite interesting that even in low elevation, there is a fall foliage show on the ocotillos. And here's a close-up of one of the ocotillos with golden yellowish leaves. Very pretty. And in the same area, there's a lot of Echinocereus chloranthus. The name means green flowering. And there's millions of Echinocactus horizonthalonius here. And Escobaria Radii is in the Sacramento Mountains. And Escobaria Sneedii, it's found in Carlsbad Caverns National Park, and it's also found right along the New Mexico border at the north end of the Franklin Mountains. And widespread across southeastern and south central New Mexico is Escobaria Tuberculosa. This is different from the other Escobarias down here because when the fruits are ripe, they turn red. There's a lot of Agave Lechugia. There's just tens of millions of them. And after a while, when you're hiking in this area, you don't appreciate these plants very much because they tend to rip your socks and they'll cut your lower legs. There are sharp teeth on the edges of the leaves. Another small plant that's scattered around New Mexico is Epithelantha micromeris. They're usually about the size of a golf ball, and they love to grow in a limestone rock pavement. And here's Glandula cactus radii in habitat with the really long twisted spines. The spines can get 6 inches long. And here's Linda in action as we're going down a trail. We're out hiking together. Here's one of the rare prickly pears in New Mexico. It's Pontia arenaria. The pads are quite small. They're about 1 inch wide and about 2 inches long. So other than Opuntia fragilis, it's the second smallest prickly pear in the state. And they live down between Las Cruces and El Paso, right along the state border. They love to grow in sand. Escobaria missouriensis is widely scattered. It's always quite hard to find. There are some populations between Albuquerque and Cuba, and then there are plants up in the northeastern part of the state on the eastern slopes of the Sangre de Cristos. But most of the year, this same species out in the plains, like out in Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle and Kansas, they make big groups and they get close to a foot across. But the plants in New Mexico tend to be really small and they barely come out of the soil. So it's a very difficult plant to see. And here's some plants with wide open flowers. Each head is at most 1 inch across. Another very widespread plant in the state is the Conocerias verdiflorus. And there's all sorts of forms, tiny ones, big ones, all different colors. Here's a really spiny form with red spines and white centrals. And here's one with straight spines, straight centrals and yellow radials. And growing with them was Mammaloria myacantha. This is in the foothills of the Manzano Mountains. And also growing here is Opuntia wooteni. And here it's in summer growth, filled up with water. And here's a habitat on the south end of the Manzanos in the rolling foothills here. This area is just completely packed with Echinomastus dasyacanthes. And if you look around in here, here's a whole bunch of plants, and here's some more, and out here, and they're this area has more Economastus than any other place I think I've ever seen. And it's an amazing place to go visit. And here's a close-up of a really large plant. Typically the plants are the size of a large orange to a grapefruit sort of size. And here they are in flower. They flower very early. They'll start to flower in March, and they'll be done flowering by early April. And even if it gets down to 10 degrees while they're flowering, it has no effect on the fruits developing. The flowers are impervious to a hard freeze. And there's a lot of jackrabbits here. And they're jumping around here and there. This one was like 5 feet from me, and it was being still to hide. So I took its pictures. And then just a minute later was hiking, and I saw what he had been doing. He had just eaten an Echinocerius viridiflorus, just eaten it completely down to the ground. And up high in the Manzano Mountains, there's a unique form of Echinocerius triglochiliadis. They have very few spines. Some of the plants are almost spineless. And on a lot of the aerials, there's only one spine per aerial. So this is a quite interesting form to grow. Now, for some really obscure succulents. This is high up in the Manzano Mountains at about 9,000 feet elevation. There's Ephemeranthus convertiflorus, and it's growing on a slab of rock. There's a shallow layer of soil here, but this succulent is quite tough. It has to withstand cold, and then it's growing in just real shallow soil. So, and they flower on and off during the summer, depending on the rains. And in the same area, was extremely thrilled to see Sedum cockerellii, again at just a hair under 9,000 feet elevation. Beautiful little plants growing in rock cracks. And the biggest barrel type plant that lives in the state is Sclerocactus wislizanii. They're in the Rio Grande Valley from about the Tiersee area and south, and then west over Deming and Lordsburg. And before the really massive freeze back in 2011, there were plants in the Oregon Mountains that were as big as modern refrigerators. So the plants were just massive, but all of those big plants froze and died. One of the little obscure opuntioid type plants that's all around the state is Grussonia clavata. And they have really wicked spines. And in addition to the spines being wicked, the fruits are just downright lethal. You don't want to get anywhere close to a fruit. You need something like tongs, and you never want to get too close to it because it's got millions of glochids that float off. And so it's an amazing plant how tough they are. They tend to grow in the hottest and the driest little microhabitats. And they never seem to suffer, no matter how hot it gets or how long the drought. We have this plant lives on several little mountain islands in south central and southwestern New Mexico. It's Echinocerius chloranthus variety, rhyolitensis. They are very spiny and very beautiful. The spination is really dense. You can barely see the body of the plant. Coryphantha macromeris. That's widespread across the southern 1/5 of the state. They can make some really big piles. I've seen a few piles about 4 feet across. Quite impressive. And here's the flower on macromeris. They flower multiple times during the summer, depending upon the rains. And here's Pontia macrocentra, named because the central spine is so long and lethal. And here's the flower with a bee coming. Well, I suppose the bee is exiting the flower, but typical for Macrocentra, the flower is yellow with a red throat. And here's a side view of the big barrel Sclerocactus Wistlezanii, showing the long hook spines. The spines have a lot of authority. If these spines catch on to your clothing or your skin, usually the spines will win in that tug of war. And one of the nasty choias in the state is Pontia Leptocollis. The ranching people often call this Christmas cactus because these red fruits appear in December, and it has a Christmas color to it. Agave neomexicana is found along the southern Rio Grande Valley, off to the south and the east. It makes it all the way into the southeast corner of the state, and they're often in the foothills of the mountains. It's smaller than the larger agaves from the southwestern part of the state. And on rocky outcrops all over the central and southern parts of the state is Daceleri and Wheelerii. They love to grow in these rock cracks, and a great place to see them is the Malpais by Carrizozo. There's just millions of them growing in those lava flows. Here, when I was hiking, there was a praying mantis checking out the world, and it's fun to have a little variety in your program. Here's Escobaria Organensis variety Konigii. It's in the Florida Mountains, and growing with it is Mammalorия Grahami. And Grahami is usually about the size of an average orange. And here's the Organ Mountains in the Las Cruces area. It's a series of these big granite blocks that now are exposed. It's an interesting cacti here. And a real unique plant is Escobari Organensis. In this situation where I found them, they were growing in a deep canyon, and it only got sun here about 10% of the time during the summer. And during the winter here, there would be no direct sun at all. So it would be really cold up high here in the Organs. To me, it's a very interesting plant. See how it's growing on these slabs of moss on this really close to vertical exposure up high in the Organ Mountains. It's just amazing how cacti find all of these habitats to occupy. And we're almost done. Here's the tent rocks up northwest of Albuquerque, up in the Cochiti area. It's an amazing place to go just for the scenery, but if you take the hike up to the end of the trail, you'll see some beautiful cacti. These tent rocks are just amazing, the way the volcanic ash has eroded away. leaving these little tents up on top of the spires. And once you get up high on the plateau, you'll see lots of Echinocerius coccineus. And just for some fun, I was with Rob Romero, and we were down in the Bootheel part of New Mexico, and we were out in the middle of nowhere. And somebody put up this this sign, pony rides, 5 minutes for a quarter. And here I am. I stopped and took advantage of this art display out in the middle of nowhere. And that's the end of my program. I hope you're surprised at just by how much we have in New Mexico. And it's not all in this program because there's just not enough time to do them all.